Robert, on a scale of 1 to 100, 100 being the most certain, uh, where do you rank in terms of believing that Muhammad didn't exist?
Oh, I'm at 100. I don't have any doubt about it whatsoever. There's no independent attestation of this man's existence at the time that he lived. There is no mention of him, and this is what's most striking. All the while that the Arabs are conquering half the world and subduing it, they don't. There's no mention of Muhammad or Quran or Islam, or very scant mention of Muhammad, and no mention of Quran or Islam. And you got to think that just doesn't make any sense. If Quran and Islam existed, why is nobody talking about them at all, ever, while the Arabs are conquering? Sophronius of Jerusalem, the patriarch of Jerusalem in the 630s, when the Arabs conquered Jerusalem, he speaks extensively. He leaves a great deal of writings behind about the conquest and how he's wrestling with it from a theological standpoint. But he never gives the shadow of a hint that the conquerors have a new religion. And that's an extraordinary omission if they really did. And the religion had motivated their conquest.
Okay, so then what's going on here then? What is Islam based on then, and who created this mythical character and why? And what are the ramifications of your findings to this religion?
Well, my findings destroy Islam, actually. That's why they're ignored. They don't have an answer. And so they have to ignore it because otherwise the whole house of cards falls down. But the what seems to be most likely is that Abdul Malik, who was the caliph from 685 to 705 of that Arab empire, and his lieutenant, the governor of Iraq, Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, they constructed Islam and invented Muhammad because they wanted a religion that they could use to unify their empire. In those days, you didn't have constitutions or parliaments. The unity of an empire was formed by its having a common religion. This is why the ecumenical councils of the early church were held at that time in order to unify the Roman Empire and to define what it meant for the Christian Roman Empire, what it meant to be a full citizen, that you believed in these things that were delineated by the councils. The Persian Empire, which was the other great power of the day, was Zoroastrian, and Zoroastrianism was the center of its unity. Both of these were multi-ethnic empires. It was not nationality that bound them together, it was the common religion. So the Arabs had amassed this massive empire and brought all these disparate peoples under their sway. And then they began to develop this religion that would unify and solidify the unity of their empire. And so it was Abdul Malik and Hajjaj ibn Yusuf. There are a number of reasons to think this. One of them is a telling little detail that comes out of Islamic tradition. An old man in Iraq, he says, we never read the Quran in mosques before the time of Hajjaj ibn Yusuf. Now, that doesn't make any sense if you take the standard story, because the standard story is that Uthman, the caliph in the 650s, uh, codified the Quran, brought all the people who'd memorized parts of the Quran together, standardized the text, and then distributed the Quran to all the provinces. So by the time of Hajjaj, they should have had the Quran for almost 50 years. And instead, we have this weird story where the guy says, we only got started reading the Quran recently when Hajjaj was around. So what is much more likely is that there was no Quran at the time of Uthman, and that the story that he is the one who is responsible for the Quran is false, because, well, obviously, if it were around, somebody would have quoted it, but there's no mention of it anywhere. And it's only later, it's only actually after Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, or at the time of Hajjaj, that you start to get quotes from the Quran. And so it seems likely that Abdul Malik and Hajjaj and the other people around them created Islam, put the Quran together, invented Muhammad to create this religion that would unify and strengthen their empire.
But Robert, it's absolutely amazing that you get zero um, dialogue and scholarly exchange with the Islamic intelligentsia or scholars on this.
All they're so how you say uncompromising. I mean, like this. When I wrote my first book way back before you were born, I wrote my first. It was 2001. I wrote my first book, Islam Unveiled, and I really actually thought that there would be Islamic scholars who would deal with this honestly and we'd have a good dialogue. And instead, they started calling me a hate monger and an Islamophobe. And I thought, wait a minute, you don't know me. You don't know if I hate anybody. And I didn't write this out of hate. I wrote this in good faith to ask some serious questions. But for them, if you say anything remotely critical about Islam or Muhammad or Quran, then you're just full of hate and they're not going to deal with you.
Yeah.
And that's how they've dealt with me now for all these years.
Bizarre. How do you feel when somebody calls you an Islamophobe?
Well, now it's like breathing. It happens so much. I
Mm.
don't really think about it.
Yeah.
But it used to bother me a great deal because I would think, well, this is a fine situation, really, where people are using ad hominem attacks
Yeah.
to impugn all this work that I've done, which I think is actually in good faith. It's reasonable and useful work. And so it's a shame that it's stigmatized so, but that's also, of course, the left as well as Islam.